Hi, and welcome back. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Kelly Funkhauser.
I'm Gabe Shenar.
So on this episode of Talking Cars, we are going to be talking about a super cool car. We're talking space-age technology. We've had an opportunity to spend some time driving a second-generation Toyota Mirai. This is now it's a rear-wheel drive version of this hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. And a lot of people are like, well, hydrogen, how the heck does that work? So hydrogen-powered vehicles use an onboard fuel cell to generate electricity using ambient oxygen and compressed hydrogen stored in the vehicle's built-in tanks. The electricity powers the vehicle, and clean water drips from beneath the car as a byproduct of the chemical reaction. That's a shortened version of saying, wow, this is actually a real thing. It's not just pie in the sky kind of thoughts about a new way to propel cars. The Toyota is saying that it has up to 400 miles of a cruising range. They're including up to $15,000 of complimentary hydrogen with a purchase or a lease. Pricing starts about $49,500, but here's the catch. It's on sale in California only. And we rented two versions from Toyota, an XLE and a Limited. And Gabe, you're one of a few people who have been able to drive both the first and second generation of the Mirai. What do you think?
Exactly. So some of our viewers will remember that we tested the first generation Toyota Mirai. We actually bought it in California and hauled it to our facility in Connecticut, and went through the whole living with it and filling it up in our station close by, 30 miles from us in Wallingford, Connecticut. The second generation is, while the first generation was a little clumsy looking kind of car and clumsy handling, second generation really transforms it into a much more like a sports sedan kind of a car. Not only it's stylish, but it's also based on a rear wheel drive Lexus platform that feels a lot more substantial. Now, in general, fuel cell cars, like you said, they're electric vehicles that produce their power on board, but the drawbacks are that the hydrogen tanks take a lot of space, so there is a compromise in packaging. And the elephant in the room, of course, is the charging, the filling infrastructure. Right now, we have about 40 stations nationwide. Most of them are concentrated in California.
That actually was a nice little slip, Gabe. You said charging, because we're usually talking about electric cars.
Yeah, exactly. So most of them are concentrated in the Bay Area or in the LA metro area. And there is really a lack of hydrogen infrastructure. So that's why everybody says, it's like the technology of the 20 years from now. And meanwhile, we're witnessing that EVs are really taking off, and the hydrogen fuel cell, not really. Right now, you only have the Mirai and the Hyundai Nexo as fuel cell vehicles, both only available in California. Both sell minuscule units. Toyota sold about 2,600 Mirais, which is less than half of the Toyota Supra that they sell, also small volume. Mm-hmm. So, you have some real built-in obstacles there.
Well, and Kelly, Gabe touched on this about infrastructure issues. That being said, does hydrogen have any chance, do you think, for the future?
I think hydrogen is the future. The fact that, essentially the only output emission is water, and, a lot of the hydrogen fuel cell itself is built cleanly. I think that there are a lot of, potential future implementations of this car. And I look at it kind of as like Gabe said, this is the car of the future. So where we're at right now is think electric vehicles 10 or even 20 years ago, right? They were very, very new. The infrastructure was sparse. We're at that point right now with the hydrogen fuel cells. But the fact that the Mirai can get 400 miles to a tank, that is way better than we were for EVs 10, even 5 years ago, really. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that, this technology seems to be up and coming, that means that it's only going to get even better from here on out.
Yeah, I certainly remember seeing this second generation Mirai at an auto show a few years ago. Remember when we used to go to auto shows? Oh gosh, striking styling. I think it's a very good looking car, and Gabe, you touched on it being on a Lexus platform. Another Lexus influence, to my eye, is the interior. This is a pretty beautiful interior.
Yeah, it's pretty snazzy. I mean, you have fall leather and soft touches and a lot of high-end kind of touch points there. So it could totally pass for a Lexus. And I'm sure inside the Toyota boardroom, they were discussing whether or not to introduce that as a Lexus.
No, that's a good point.
But Toyota, another thing here. Toyota's been a bit gun shy on electric vehicles, pure electric vehicles, and they're very careful not to put all their eggs in one basket. So they have all the technologies, and they've been pretty gung ho about the hydrogen, because the advantage here is that instead of charging an electric vehicles for hours, here you fill it up. Within a few minutes, which is similar to filling up with gas. So that's the advantage. But I see the future of hydrogen more in commercial vehicles and in buses and heavy trucks rather than private cars for consumers, mainly because of the packaging challenges. The Mirai is quite a large car, and sit in the back seat, and it's pretty cramped in there. And the trunk also, one of the hydrogen tanks robs so much space that the trunk is tiny. So you have these compromises built into just by virtue of carrying all that hydrogen on board.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, the packaging adds up to a lot of weight. I mean, driving this car, it did not feel as it didn't have like this ferocious acceleration that we've seen from so many electric cars. In fact, it almost felt a little sluggish. I mean, there's reports of acceleration from 0 to 60 about 9 seconds. That's pretty slow.
Absolutely. The car is pretty heavy. It weighs, on our scales, we had it weighed yesterday. It's 4,300 pounds kind of car, and only has 182 horsepower. So right there, you can see that that's not really an impressive ratio between power and weight. So when you drive it, it feels okay. But for the kind of size of the car and the price of the car, definitely it feels a little leisurely in terms of acceleration.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kelly, all things being equal, if people can have, in a perfect world, the infrastructure is going to be there. Do you think it's a compelling a choice to take one of these over, one of the more popular electric vehicles?
Yeah, I think especially if you're coming from a gas-powered vehicle and don't have all of the miles that we've put in with electric vehicles, expecting that instant torque and acceleration, it's still a pleasant drive, even though it's heavy, because it's not, doesn't have the gas-powered and transmission in it. It's very smooth acceleration. And so I found it very pleasant to drive. And so I do think that a lot of consumers will be happy with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, just like an EV, if the hydrogen infrastructure increases, it will require a lot of planning. I mean, you have to plan when you have an EV. You're going to have to plan if you have a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, and the road trips are going to be a challenge. I kind of laughed to myself when you said we bought a first generation. We had it hauled back from California. It's like, what a story that would have been if we drove it back from California. Finding enough charging stations or fueling stations to get us from California to Connecticut.
So the future, though, if we're reducing the number of gas-powered vehicles that are even going to be allowed to be sold in the U.S., a lot of those gas stations are likely going to have to be converted. So essentially, the infrastructure is there. It's just filled with the wrong fuel for hydrogen powered cars. So, it's a little different from the electric vehicle infrastructure. We have to build these charging stations. Gas stations are there. So in the future, perhaps the physical infrastructure is already there too.
And Gabe, you're going to say?
Oh, I was going to just echo what Kelly said about how pleasant the car is. And it indeed is a comfortable riding car, and it's a very quiet car, and the handling is pretty good. It's not sporty, but you can feel the roots of the rear-wheel drive chassis in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a neat opportunity that the three of us have to drive such technology. We'll have more in the Toyota Mirai. Just check consumerreports.org. And, here we are. We're going to jet off into the next part of this podcast, which is the question of the day. We love your questions, text questions, 30-second videos. Keep sending them to talkingcars@icloud.com. That's talkingcars@icloud.com. We have a video question now from Brad.
Hey guys, I have two questions for you about Ford's Blue Cruise feature. The first one is Ford really promoted this idea that they were going to be using LiDAR mapping of the highways as part of Blue Cruise. But what I can't figure out is, and Ford hasn't been sharing this information, is whether or not that mapping actually makes Blue Cruise more accurate than just traditional lane keeping that's already included in the cars, or if they're just mapping the highways in order to create a geofence within which Blue Cruise can be used. My second question is, assuming that it's just to create a geofence and Blue Cruise isn't actually more accurate than just normal lane keeping with adaptive cruise control, for those of us that didn't have Blue Cruise equipped with their vehicles, do you think it's worth paying an extra $500 essentially to switch from what we currently have, which has what I call a hand nanny to make sure your hands are on the wheel, to swap that out for an eye nanny instead? Thanks a lot.
So Kelly, I'm going to start with you. You spent a lot of time studying and using these systems. What can you say to Brad?
Yeah, so just like the car that I think Brad has, we have for our test program a early production vehicle that hasn't received the over-the-air update for Blue Cruise, but we did rent one from Ford, and so we've experienced it. And Brad, I think you're right on where this mapping idea really kind of leads to a geofence type of a scenario for the Blue Cruise, but it's a little bit different in the Blue Cruise, the Ford Blue Cruise, as it is from the Cadillac Super Cruise, where Super Cruise really geofence locks use of any part of the system, the lane centering plus adaptive cruise control to only limited portions of those pre-mapped roadways. But the Blue Cruise is different because what it does is you can use those same features, the centering and adaptive cruise control, on all roadways. But this adds a component to it where you have these sections of hands-free operation of the vehicle. So rather than, not allowing you to use the system at all, it's actually adding a feature to it. And the mapping, in our experience, we found actually is helpful, because what happens is if your GPS says that you're approaching a curve or there's an issue with the lane lines coming up, it prompts the driver to keep their hands on the wheel. So going from the hands-free to, asking the driver to have their hands essentially at the ready. We found that the systems are capable most of the time to continue to, make the curve with staying in the center of the lane line. But it is really nice to have the driver's hands at the ready just in case. And we found that actually reassuring. And then the second part of the question is really, is it worth it to change from the, have to apply the torque or keep your hands on the wheel compared to now using the eye tracker? And, I think once you use that eye tracker, you quickly realize why everyone looks at it so fondly and favorably, because it does, kind of reduce that annoyance of, having to touch the steering wheel or steer it a little bit, even if you're on a very straight road. So once you experience it, you'll love it. And we find it to be a better safety mechanism as well.
And Gabe, you want to weigh in on this?
I mean, it's a good question there, and I think you know yourself better. You know what you can afford, whether or not it's worth $500. We can't tell you. You know that better than us, but invariably there's going to be a moment where you're going to be distracted. So the eye tracking is a much more effective kind of way to keep you engaged than just monitoring your hand on the wheel.
Mm-hmm. It also shows what a highly educated audience Talking Cars has. Not every day we get questions that brings up LiDAR. So anyway, Brad, great question. Thanks for sending them in. And that's really going to wrap up this episode of Talking Cars. Thanks so much. As always, check the show notes for more information on the vehicles and topics that we talked about. We'll see you next week.